Keep it fresh. What does keep it fresh mean? Ever new, ever now, ever fresh. Keep it fresh. And we're invited to come up with our own reminders, or, they used to tie a little pink ribbon around their pinky so they wouldn't forget. Just whatever helps us to stay tuned in. So when I'm saying keep it fresh, it's a reminder to be aware, present and aware to what's happening right now, at the very least, for starters, and to keep that fresh. So that is an emphasis in traditions which have been inspiring and guiding me. And from the very first, actually, as mentioned, my first retreat was a day of mindfulness with Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen master and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh, who was very much one of the early pioneers bringing this, overarching virtue of mindfulness into the Western spiritual milieu like that. And so a day of mindfulness, I said, wow, you can be mindful for a whole day. Amazing. And sure enough, all the activities, this was in the early days of Spirit Rock. So we sat out on hillsides, and there was just a small yurt down at the entryway. So all the activities had this theme about being mindful and present and tuning into the inherent peace, which is in the presence. And in many, many wonderful reflections in that way, to just be connecting and interconnecting and being and interbeing. So from the, yes, and we do a very slow whole walking meditation, around the bell. We take a whole hour. Each step, I breathe in. Step, I breathe out. I am at peace. I remember this so well, and it was in the mid-90s. But just how amazing and novel it was, and refreshing and energizing and awakening it was to be awakening all these appreciations in me as if all at once, like that. So it just so much gratitude and feeling of a good fortune for having had a very inspiring, say, first encounter with the Dharma. My first encounters with the Dharma were all very inspiring. And my first monastic encounters, very inspiring. I would continue to go see Thich Nhat Hanh every time he'd come to the Bay Area, and usually it was over in the Berkeley Community Center. And it just was amazing to me. He'd travel with 40 monks and nuns, 20 on one side, 20 on the other, and they'd all sit in full lotus for the full 2-hour program. And I was really amazed by that. And I would just notice, I'd be in these, sort of auditorium seats, and I'd be wrapped on the edge of my seat in, perfect high voltage mindfulness the whole time. My friends were kind of like, wow. But so I was really inspiring, or, being impacted, connecting with something there. So yes, I am ever grateful for getting that early guidance and inspiration, which I feel really did help to tune me into what some of the basics are, some of the fundamentals or universals are, like mindfulness. At that time in my life, it was especially showing up as consciousness. Consciousness was a big thing. I was studying psychology and neuroscience and Native American spirituality with, plant medicines and things like this. So I was framing it in terms of like consciousness and experience and being an experiencing being in this sort of ocean of sentience and consciousness, so to speak, that had so many mysteries and treasures awaiting to reveal itself. And then, surely enough, some of my earliest um, encounters were through yoga, also, like Indian yoga, which does say, yes, these are the treasures, the mysteries and treasures awaiting us right here, sort of in our outer inner space, or our inner cosmos, and the outer cosmos as like one whole cosmos. So this theme of mindfulness, or consciousness and awareness, was very prominent in my spiritual inspiration, and to this day. And so not all traditions are emphatic equally in that way. With the knowing, like some are framing it much more from the perspective of the loving and the feeling aspect. And as that is, and I must include here that the from starting from Thich Nhat Hanh and all the way on, I mean, the traditions of this kind of the being and the knowing and the consciousness that I connected with did all include this very central, heart aspect to it, whether it was from the Tibetan, like the bodhicitta, or the Zen or the Mahayana and the compassion, Avalokiteshvara, or the Indian sort of non-duality traditions of like Sat Chit Ananda. They all very much included this element, this of sort of this ocean of benevolent sentience, as far as the heart element, the chitta, and the priority of feeling, and especially this kind of loving or universal love and compassion, just the expression of the heart. So both of those have been sort of, especially the pillars, inspiring and guiding my practice and inspiration. And so this Keep It Fresh is referring to that. Keeping it fresh, whatever helps to keep that at the forefront of our experience, what we're recognizing, and how experience is unfolding in that or as that. Again, this could be a figure ground reversal at some time, at some point, where I feel like I'm the autonomous agent here, the separate self, and then there'll be a flip. And it's if that whole of the totality, or the the consciousness and the awareness and the loving, that is actually doing us through this little trick of nature called a separate sense of self. That can happen. It can feel like that. And of course, that will begin to make more and more sense as our becoming familiar or agreeable with many of the insight themes develops.
One thing I noticed in my own practice is that if you have listened to different teachers, then there's some teachers that you find very inspiring, and you listen to them and you go, yeah, this is really wonderful. And then sometime later, you hear another teacher actually saying the same thing, but with different words. And all of a sudden, something clicks. And you thought you understood it beforehand, but now you understand it in a different way. And that's what I find so interesting. It's like how our mind really works in that sense. I myself come from a science background, so I've always wondered. It's like, well, how does this whole thing really work? And to find out at some point that our experience of life all happens within ourselves. And that I found incredibly interesting. And let me explain that a little bit more. You might remember from high school physics that the things we see or hear, I'll stick with these few, but of course it goes with all the senses. The things that we see is just the spectrum of visible light, which is actually only a very small little bandwidth within everything that's out there, to the whole spectrum of it. And a cat might see something quite different. A mosquito can see us as a big light bulb in a very dark room where we can't see anything at all. So it's for different creatures. This what they actually pick up is quite different. And the same with sound. There's only a very small little part of the bandwidth that we actually can hear. And we need this body as this sort of this sort of device to pick these things up and translate it for us. We need our senses, like radio signals or Wi-Fi signals, mobile phone signals. We cannot experience them directly. We need a device to translate them for us in something that we can actually see or hear. And all these things are still here. All these radio waves, mobile phone waves, they're here, right in this room. Yet we cannot see them or hear them. And it's because our senses are only made to pick up a very tiny bit of what is really there. And that raises an enormous amount of questions. It's like, would there be beings that can pick up things that that we cannot see or hear at all? Would there be, like, for instance, such things as devas, which is spoken about in the Buddhist texts, that we cannot experience, we cannot see or hear, but they're still there, picking up maybe different parts of that bandwidth. But I don't want to go into that kind of cosmology kind of thing. But to come back more to ourselves, it's like everything we experience is these bandwidths that's coming to our eyes or ears. It gives an electrical signal to our brain, and in our brain it starts to be compared with this whole memory database of things we have experienced, and then it comes back with some verdict. Okay, this is like really good. I really love seeing these beautiful flowers, or this is really bad and I don't like it at all. And or a lot of things are also neutral. And so we start to sort of filter these things in a way. We don't also, everything we see, we cannot see everything at once. We focus on particular things and might not see other things. For instance, when there's an accident happening, for the police, it's really difficult quite often to make up to rely on the eyewitness testimonies, because different people might have seen different things, and it might not always match these testimonies, because we filter things out. Everything we see is just too much to take in one go. So we filter things out, what is important. And so when this memory database comes back with this verdict of good, bad, or neutral, then it starts producing some neurons in our brain that start going through our body, and we get feelings. We get feelings of good feelings or bad feelings, or neutral feelings, whatever it is. And then we start to react to that. Oh, I like this. I want more of this. There's a craving. There's a craving for more if we want more of it. Or we want to push it away. Oh, I really don't like this. But it can also be different for different people. It's like one person sees something and goes like, oh, this is really beautiful. And the other one, somebody else goes like, nah, how can you say that? That's horrible. And also for people, I think I have to go downstairs, by the way, because package has arrived. So, I'm gonna leave it here and pause and leave it to you to continue my little.
Okay.
Okay.
Ajahn Santa channel.
Yeah, that's one of the phrases I like very much is that the beginner's mind. Maybe probably some of you have come across that book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. But yeah, I think like Ajahn and Jan were saying, uh, if how when it's like when we maybe first came across meditation or then that might be we it's like something very new and something very magical, that feeling of, oh, I didn't know that something like this could exist, and that feeling of wonder, of interest, of the ordinary becoming something new, the sort of strangeness of the ordinary, the miracle of the ordinary. And so, and then unfortunately, as we maybe practice over the years, then maybe that a sense of wonder can go away. And then this becomes more routine or more habitual. But if we are able to, sort of meet everything, every experience as if it's a completely new experience, cultivating, consciously attempting to cultivate that beginner's mind, cultivating that sense of a sort of childlike curiosity. If we look at children, they go to a new place and they're exploring and looking around, and so everything is new. And then if we are able to bring that sort of attitude to our internal world, our internal experience, the world of sensations, vedana, sort of emotions, mind states, chitta, and each time we experience some emotion, we could just dismiss it as, oh, this is just anger, this is just irritation, this is just happiness. But if, yeah, I suppose in a sense that is one of the properties of mindfulness, that mindfulness, it doesn't make a decision too soon. It just stays with the object, or just stays with the experience, and just noticing, what is this? Taking an interest, maybe looking at it from a different perspective than we might habitually look at it. And yeah, that thing of staying, I suppose, making peace with the not knowing as well. So we can, by in a sense, by deciding too soon, okay, this is that, then the moment we decide or articulate something, that is a moment where we cut off other possibilities, other interpretations of, or other ways of looking at that particular thing. So I might call this stick to ring the bell, but then it's, that may be one of the things it is, but it's also wooden. So by calling it a particular thing, I sort of limit what it is. But say with mindfulness, it's just being with that. one of the shape, the color, the top wood, the texture. So it can function to ring the bell, but it's also so many other things. So in that same way, bringing that quality of interest, investigation to whatever we may experience, and we may easily dismiss experience that might not be so interesting, like neutral feeling, or it doesn't draw the attention, doesn't draw the interest, and so we may not really be why give any attention to this. But as we look closer, they sort of reveal new facets of things we might have taken for granted, things we might have just sort of built our worldview, our way of looking at the world on. But if we strive to, like this idea of insight, seeing, we might on an intellectual level, we might know, okay, impermanence, people, these human bodies are fragile, old age, sickness, and death are a reality. So on that level, but we may not see impermanence as it is happening in our sort of moment by moment existence. So or impermanence or suffering, again, what is that? And suffering, of course, as we were saying before, in the whole spectrum, from the sort of mild dissatisfactoriness to more intense suffering, the whole spectrum. So is there something like that exists in something that we may be experiencing, or anatta, non-self? Is there in whatever we may be experiencing, is there actually something that we can describe as this is me, mine, myself? And then not so much approaching it from an intellectual or conceptual point of view, but in actual experience, seeing, are these characteristics present? The more one can see that, the more one can understand what it actually, what maybe anicca, impermanence, what that actually means, what that, and then the consequences that follow for how we might live our lives, how we might think about the world, etc. And so also that making peace with the not knowing. Often there can be a strong desire to know the right answer, to know the best tradition, the best teacher, the best, however it may we may think of it. But if one is, but then if through that desire to know, one sort of that anxiety based upon which we sort of grasp at a particular understanding, a particular interpretation, then again that delimits sort of what we see. But if we are able to stay with that sort of uncomfort, it may be uncomfortable, but that sense of not knowing, because that place of not knowing is also a place of investigation, that sort of open, receptive quality, that observing, that taking an interest, that beginner's mind, that childlike curiosity. And then through that sort of practice and insight or wisdom can hopefully arise, can develop, and yes, something comes to mind.
I have to continue where I left off. I hope this is not too confusing for everyone. Having different talks with each other. So yes, where was I? That get these feelings on the body that are pleasant or neutral or unpleasant, and we start to react to that. And there's where this tanha craving actually comes in. Is this wanting more of pleasant feelings and wanting less of the unpleasant feelings. And it's also a place where we can actually cut this cycle by taking a step back and just looking at these feelings and be like, hey, what's going on here? Rather than being reactive immediately to that. Because quite often in day-to-day life, we're not very mindful of this thing happening, but we just react. We automatically react to these feelings. But if we are mindful and take a step back and about, oh, well, what's going on here? There's a pleasant feeling, and there is sort of some craving that wants to have more of that. So staying with these feelings, with a sense of caring, with a sense of patience, or like a scientist, this curiosity. In fact, curiosity always a very fascinating one. To want to understand what is really going on here. Why is this a pleasant feeling here? Or why is this a negative feeling? Quite often we want to do these things when it's negative feelings, because that's one way of getting rid of them. But also with the pleasant feelings or the neutral feelings, and so staying with it with curiosity, and there we can cut this cycle as well. Coming back also to Thich Nhat Hanh, there's one teaching from Thich Nhat Hanh that I always find very helpful, and he quite often teaches with a whiteboard. And so on this whiteboard, he draws this big circle, and in the middle of the circle is a wavy line, and you probably know that one, yes. And on the bottom of that circle, there's lots of dots. So, and he explains like, well, okay, this is the mind, and the top bit, which is at that moment still empty, that's everything we're conscious of. And everything below it is everything in our subconscious, all the things that can be triggered, all the anger and negativities, but also the love and kindness, the caring, all the good qualities, all the bad qualities, anything is there that can be triggered, it can come up. Now, something happens, for instance, somebody says something to us, and up comes anger, and it goes to the top part of this thing. And it can, three things can happen here. And quite often, when we're not very mindful, it's either one of two extremes. Either it overwhelms us completely. We don't see anything else anymore. And you probably all know this kind of out of state, where you just become completely furious or completely overwhelmed by whatever emotion it is, or sad or whatever. And you can only think about what has happened in the past that might have brought this on. But what you're thinking about is the trigger, not the cause. And the other option is that you're thinking like, oh, I'm a good Buddhist, I don't have negative emotions, and you repress it. Or whatever other ways we learn in our lives to repress things. If you get taught as a child that you're not supposed to cry, or that you're not supposed to have these emotions. I once had a friend, and we talked about emotions, and he said he had only had two emotions, okay or shitty. And it's also not being aware of all the nuances in there, what's happening, and just wanting to repress it. It's like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want this right now. I just, for instance, sometimes using self-medication like drugs can also be a way of repressing these emotions. But both these do not work, because in the first case, when you completely get overwhelmed, you just make it bigger. Right? And in the second case, it looks like it's not there, but underneath it starts to simmer, and at some point you just explode. So neither of these actually work. So the middle way is to be mindful. And to be mindful is like, oh, what is happening here? And staying with that, with love and kindness. Mindfulness without love and kindness, or without caring, is not really the mindfulness the Buddha talks about. Cat is very mindful. I've seen her sometimes sitting by a mouse hole, and you can't distract her whatsoever. He's very, very focused, very mindful, but that's not the kind of mindfulness we're talking about, of course. There's not much love and kindness in that, and not much caring for the mouse in any case. So, staying with these emotions, with this love and kindness, this caring, and just seeing what's going on there, without adding more negativity to it, of like, oh, I don't like this, I won't want this, I want to get rid of this. But if we just start to understand how this all works, then yeah, at some point you will see it change. There's this anicca, and the impermanence of these feelings, and these feelings tend to then at some point it tend to cease as well, and it might come up again in some future, but a little bit less strong. And every time it's going to be, if you do that, it's going to be a little bit less strong until it doesn't arise again. So, and that's really the way, it's a really beautiful way of going about being with and accepting completely the way you are. This is all these things are just in our conditioning. And this is how we've been conditioned ever since we were a small child, maybe from past lives, but at least since a small child. And if we learn to understand what this conditioning is, then we sometimes also get some insights. Is that, oh, I remember a previous time I had this, and why this was triggered, what this reminds me of, or what's going on there. And if you have a real good insight, and it's like, oh, I don't need this anymore, I can let it go now. So learning to get to understand our own triggers, and learning to accept that these triggers are there because we've been conditioned in that way, and then we can learn to let them go as well in a steady way. But first we have to be like the scientist and be with these sensations, with these emotions, and until we understand what's going on. And any scientist might know that sometimes these things take a long time. I studied in geophysics, and yeah, some of my at least geology colleagues, students, they would sometimes do experiments that lasted many days. And then we had this very fancy lab at the university, and they would sleep there and have to get up every 1 or 2 hours to take some more measurements, and then go to sleep again on the floor of the lab. Or so, and it could take many days to really get some kind of understanding. And then there's this sort of craving of wanting to get it earlier done, and to start interpolating the data that you have early, and say, oh, well, see, it's going that way, the curve, so it must be that way, or this is what I'm supposed to get out of it, or want to get out of it. But a good scientist is like, it doesn't start to interpret the results until all the data is in. So we don't start to think about, oh, I've got this feeling, what would that be? Or start to try thinking our way through. That doesn't work quite often. We have to learn to just be with it without thinking about it, without going into all the past things that might have happened or might not have happened. And then we learn slowly how to, how to interpret that. But I also remember one thing that in the slight interruption to my speech, I forgot to say. And it's also for what I learned from all this is that everything that is happening outside, I can only experience it within the constraints of this body, within this mind-body structure, with these senses. I don't actually know what happens outside. We have learned together to make certain agreements on what is what. Like your mother teaching you when you're a small child, well, what color is red and what color is blue and what color is green. But before that, you just see something, you don't know how to interpret it. You see forms and colors or whatever, you hear sounds, but it doesn't mean anything. And you slowly learn what in our society these things mean. And so we learn to agree on certain things. But if you look at, there's this one very famous example that is when Columbus first came to America. Well, nobody had seen these big ships before, and they didn't see them when they appeared on the horizon because it was so outside of their understanding of anything. They couldn't perceive them until they were much, much closer, and then it was like, oh, there is something there. But we filter these things out. We filter things out that don't fit in that picture of us. And there is so much more to life that we don't see or experience because of that. And the way we see life is only within ourselves. It's only within our mind-body structure. And how I see each one of you, it might be very different from how others of you see me or see each other. Everything I'm saying as well. Everybody here understands it different from how I say it. So it's always difficult for a teacher because like whatever room you're in, if your room is 100 people all have a slightly different interpretation of what you're saying. So it's fascinating how this works, and then how we can and we see it on a world scale as well, how opinions can be so vastly different on the same things. Why is that? It's because not because the other person's bad. Have you ever noticed that other people are always wrong? I'm always right, right? But like, well, my opinion's right. Everybody else is always wrong, and the other person thinks the same thing. So that doesn't work. So maybe you have to think like, oh, maybe I am not always, maybe this is not right, what I'm thinking. Maybe start to question yourself a little bit more on these things. Anyway, before I go too far on the tangent, I'll pass the way back to action.
Everyone's probably picking up on that. The topic of the talk is dependent origination, or seems to be, or perhaps often or always is in one way or another. And in co-arising or co-creation, speaking of science, these were some of my very early, dharmic insights, or what just seemed to catalyze Dharma inspiration, was doing the neuroscience and dissecting heads and seeing, oh, wait, there is a brain in here. And look, these eyeballs, they're connected by an optic nerve, to the optic lobe in the brain. And so many of the other senses seem to be sort of head-centric, that we've got all 6 senses that we can locate there. Although, of course, these days the heart and the body and the gut are being included much more in our sensory field here. But just seeing, hold on a minute here. I used to think I was a passive observer, me in here, you know, observing a world out there. And quite suddenly, I mean, you know, this was sort of before the matrix and the simulation theory of consciousness really took off. But all that began to make sense that, wow, this is really somehow arising in my consciousness. All of these sensations. And yes, whatever's out there, light or electromagnetic radiation or who knows what, seems to come into an eyeball, and then it's not really light that goes back to the brain. In the neuroscience model, it's, you know, electrical ionic impulses, and then we get the consciousness come up. And just some of those, you know, enigmas that were showing up to sort of question what the prior interpretation of or worldview had been. Me, a little me in here looking out the eyeballs at a world out there, really began to change radically. And just the nature of experience as a co-creation event. Like in philosophy class, we had that. When a tree falls in the forest, there's no one around, does it make a sound? You know, and me being the little know-it-all aspiring philosopher said, no, you need consciousness, you need hearing to hear a sound, of course, right? Well, so all of this was just beginning to show up, experience as a co-creation. And then the next class, the Buddhist psychology, had this dependent origination or co-origination. And it would seem to be really explicit already in the profundity of the Buddha's. And up back then, I also thought of it as like the science of the heart and mind, and that the Buddha's teachings are really exemplary and profound at their insight into that. And so this co-creation where actually there is not seeing, if there is not the visual consciousness or the eye and the contact between the three. And sure enough, that's dependent origination right there. So this thing about experiencing as if for the first time. I mean, look at this breath that we're having. That is the very first time we're having this breath, or hearing this sound, or feeling this thought. It's as if for the first time. So I also came across this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, at that time too. And the Beginner's Mind was just amazing to show how actually ever new, ever now, ever fresh experience is, as if undeniably it's just being overlooked or glossed over because of our tendency to go into a more of a routine or a habitual mode of living, but not there's options to that. Even just this kind of rediscovery of the magic and wonder can make things new, as if for the first time. And what does that do? It opens up possibility to reinterpret, helps melt down that solid like conditioning that we have to loop into a habit or feel like we already know something. This thing about beginner's mind, wow, all the things I know or take at face value or have jumped to conclusions about, they're suddenly open for reinterpretation. Oh my gosh, that means change can happen. That means habits can change. That means views can transform to open. Opening is such a big theme in Buddhist circles, this opening of the heart, we keep saying, or opening up the mind as, well, they're certainly not abstract. They actually describe all the phenomena that we're discussing here. Every insight is the mind opening to a new possibility and to reinterpret one's experience right now, what one's experiencing. So this thing, we always couple these two, as mentioned yesterday, although we were calling it wisdom, discernment, mindfulness and discernment, that we're being aware of our experience. This is where we get all the data, right here, right now in our experience, and discerning it to understand. We don't have to jump to a conclusion. In fact, science cannot, it's not allowed to do that. But also wisdom doesn't jump to conclusions, actually. It says this, in accord with the evidence I have at present, here's how it's discerned. One doesn't need to say this is the absolute truth. One can just say, I'm growing in discernment or understanding, like that. So that can help to reframe everything as well, where one stays open, but one also is able to utilize one's at present understanding and discernment of a situation. And look at how wonderfully that can keep it fresh and keep the open mind. Remember, the learner's, this beginner's mind is really often associated with learning and understanding and being receptive. Insight by its nature has novelty. It has eureka. It has aha. It has discovery. It has recognition, of something new. And much nuance besides. So these are major themes, and dependent origination can really bring them alive, or open up this possibility of a co-creation event and being able to experience things as if for the first time, to keep us present, keep us aware, keep us learning, and growing insight. John?
So I suppose briefly, dependent origination. That basic principle of when there is this, then this exists or arises, and then when this is not there, then this doesn't arise or doesn't come to be. And then the starting of it, avijja, or that literally that not knowing, or ignorance, or delusion, that's sort of basis upon which we build this the foundation upon which we build a sense of self. And sort of in Buddhist terms, since beginningless time, we've been sort of experiencing various rebirths, seeking happiness, seeking contentment, just on the basis of this, this avijja, or ignorance. And then so then if avijja is there, then that whole sort of whole mass of suffering arises. It goes through the chain. I might not remember all of them, but the sankharas, the conditions or conditioned things, or mental formations, or things that condition other things, determinations. So difficult to translate. And then Sankara Pachaya Parinyana, so the consciousness that arises on the basis of conditioning, and then the senses through which we see the world. And then when there's that senses or the potentiality to sense something, then the contact that arises, and then based on that context, as Venerable was saying, that pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, and on that basis we that tanha or craving arises. Then on the basis of the craving, then there's that impulse to grasp or appropriate that experience, that object, that so that take it for oneself. For me, I want it, and then or I want to push it away. Me who's here, I want to push it away, and then accept, and then it is eventually leading to birth and old age, sickness and death. And the thing with ignorance, one of the images they use avidya is like it's like both the judge and the criminal. So the criminal is on fire. So then the judge is so then the verdict is always not guilty. So then we constantly don't see that with this. And presumably enlightenment is when one actually sees what this avidya is.
Right? Closing comments. 7 minutes.
To wrap it up more, to summarize. Yeah, gosh, what did we look at today? It's like how our mind body structure works. Very short, and as the dependent origination is the structure that or this a way in which the Buddha has talked about these things, and so that there's various ways in which to like unravel this mind body structure and to look at various aspects of it. So this is one of them, and a very important one. And Buddha also said that he who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. So it basically shows the whole structure from how the mind body structure arises, but also how it leads to rebirth in that. That goes a little bit too far to talk about right now, I think, but because for us in the present moment, I think it's also important just to look at, well, what does this mean for us right now? How can we work with this by unraveling this mind body structure in various ways in which you can do that? Is like the other day we talked about it, the 5 khandhas or 5 groups or aggregates, all those things where you can grasp at as being the self, and so you can look at all these kinds of ways in which the Buddha described certain aspects and get some insights of like to see also that there is no permanent everlasting self in any of this. It's not like one person that goes from life to life to life to life. And that's one thing that the Buddha very much objected to. And that was the kind of thinking at the time before the Buddha was born already. And also very prevalent at the time of the Buddha, is to believe that there was this permanent and everlasting self. And that also carried certain characteristics, like for instance, being born a Brahmin was something that was seen as like, well, then your every life you're going to be that, because that's sort of what this mind is. And the Buddha said, no, this doesn't exist. There is no, this is constantly changing based on karma, based on our intentions in life, in the things that and how he described that was through this dependent on origination. It's like, how do we create our world? How do we create our world within ourselves and then call it me, as opposed to them. And so basically that doesn't exist. This is this creator inside ourselves that, depending on all these electrical or these waves that are coming at us and our various senses and how we interpret them, this is how we create our own world. That also gives the option to create another world and to understand that if, for instance, somebody is very depressed all the time, that's you creating that as well. You don't have to do that. There is another way of creating the world as well. So if you learn to see how this all works, and at some point you come to a point of, oh, what is me then? Really? This is all just nature. This mind body structure belongs to nature. It's nature expressing itself in this way. So, and then that gives such an insight, gives such a feeling of relief of not having to grasp at things so much and not having to have this suffering. But of course, that's like it takes time, and every time you might have this little bit of insight, and then some other time your mind is all constricted again in being very much into the grasping of something or in something that happens in your world. So it takes time. It takes a lot of time. But every little insight is something like a seed that comes to fruition again and again. And it's something we can take with us in our lives, and that's why we're practicing. I can't that I actually. Oh, still 2 minutes. You can do 2 minutes.
Okay, so we're in our mindfulness and discernment for insight practice, contemplating these amazing ways of looking, of seeing, of understanding being offered us very explicitly here in the Buddhist teachings, in the Buddha Dharma, ways of looking to understand the nature of nature, to be open, to experience things anew and afresh, to be getting new insight, deeper insight into them, seeing how these insights do have the power to loosen our grip of certain beliefs, certain views, of making things solid into a solid self, into a solid thing, into a solid in here and out there, the self and an other and the me and a mind, and all these sort of hard and fast views and beliefs that we have, or that are sort of have been conditioned in there, or a bit preconditioned, can begin to decondition and recondition. Just simply melt down and let new understandings begin to inform actually new understanding, which does seem to be more in harmony with the nature of the way things are. For example, this inner and outer. Well, somehow all of this experience is arising with my consciousness, or in my experience, or in my knowing. I can't separate any of the sensations or sense experience from the knowing of it. That's a unification there that helps to melt down sense of inner and outer, or a separate self in a separate world like that. So these insight themes can really begin to open up just deeper understandings of the Dharma, and releasing of grasping through clarifying of the not knowing or the ignorance. So let's endeavor to keep it fresh, stay tuned in, ever new, ever now, ever fresh, loving kindness and compassion, with mindfulness and wisdom, keeping it fresh. See if we can really begin to get some good continuity. We're keeping our mindfulness and discernment. So in getting up, the bow, feeling the sensations of the bowing, standing, walking across the floor, sensations of the floor and the feet, coming to the stairs, feeling the wooden handrail in the hand, walking down the stairs. We're barefoot, a little rough, no slip, sandpaper, coming to the tiles, feeling the cool tiles on the floor. They're a little bit uneven. Coming to the front door, grabbing the handle, turning it, walking through the door, putting on the shoes, feeling the texture change from the wood to the gravel and out onto the road, noticing the vistas, the sky, the cows, the birds, fresh air, cool temperature as we're walking up to the house, and just really keeping it fresh all along the way, staying tuned in to what we're experiencing, what the sensations are, keeping it fresh. So we wish all the retreat yogis fruitful practice. Okay, we'll have a half hour of walking. Well, we can do it at 12 for you.
1 hour.
1 hour.